Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the last and final installment of Ensuring Cloud Native Success webinar series. This is, of course, based on a blog post series that I did that I like to colloquially think of as how not to screw up your cloud strategy. This last part, as I'll get into, goes over the wide transformation to try to become a company that's more using cloud to basically get to the point where they have programmable business, as I like to think of it. It'll be a little brief, and we'll have time just for one or two questions at the end. Questions throughout. Feel free to type them up, and we'll see if we can answer them while we're doing this, or afterwards in the Q&A session, or we'll follow up with you if we don't do it. So as I mentioned, this is the last part of a series, and in case you haven't seen the full series of it, you can see the first two parts, the recordings of them, if you want to catch up. And if you've seen those two parts, or even one of them, thanks for joining again. To give you an overview of what these journeys are, I mean, I chose the word journey. It's something that pops up pretty frequently. Essentially what it means is the, I guess you could say, the company or the organization or whoever is looking to go cloud and become a cloud native company, the different steps that they go through and their thinking, the lessons learned. And so I've divided this approach up into three main areas. Greenfield applications, which are brand new applications that don't have very many ties to the past. And you're given a lot more freedom in the sort of way you can develop and product manage your software and release. But because they are brand new things and they're individual products, they tend to be of a smaller scope corporate-wise. They might be very important projects and thing on their own, but the rest of the company is often not company-wide. What we deal with here in the last section, the transformation thing. And also, as I'll note again at the end, there's a lot of overlap between what I talk about in the Greenfield presentation and text and also in this transformation area. In fact, those two parts go quite effectively. The Greenfield stuff goes over more tactic and actual things that I do here in the transformation section. So the middle one is over how to deal with legacy code and processes and applications. And this is more of, is varied for especially pivotal customers too, and a lot of large organizations I talk with. And that is by the very nature of being successful and having been around for a while, enough to be a large-sized organization. They have a tremendous amount of existing IT, legacy, or if you like, using different terms, you can call it heritage or something like that. All sorts of ways for denoting what your older existing IT is. And as I joke around there, and you can kind of see a deep dive into concerns more, legacy IT is essentially the stuff that makes, and it's often also thought of as the stuff, in addition to that you're fragile and you don't want to change around very much. But when you're looking at going cloud and becoming a cloud native, as we'll talk about here, those are two pretty interesting areas that come up a lot and have a lot of things. I have some suggestions around finding the pivotal community. There's a lot of help around it, and you can check those out. So right now, you're at the transformation one. So as they say on planes, it's your last chance before the doors close, if that's not where your destination is. But what I do here is kind of fills in the gaps that's left from those other two. And it also looks what companies are going through and how they're thinking when they're looking to change how the entire IT department and hopefully the company thinks about how it's using IT. And as such, a lot of what we go over here is more strategic and sort of managerial and cultural based, right? How do you transform, if you will, over a company so that it can operate more as a cloud native? You know, as I'll say at the end, I'm interested in hearing if you on all three of these. This is the kind of conversation across these three topics that I find myself in all the time, and it's always great to talk with other people who have thoughts on these things. So just to give you a brief introduction of myself, and at the risk of boring people who've seen the previous two episodes, this is me, so you've got this disembodied voice. I'm Michael Coté by my last name. You can find my Twitter antics and things up there. That's actually a pretty good way to reach me, if not with the email address below. But over my career of just 20 years ago, I think, coming next month, I've been an industry analyst for about, let's see, about 8 years or so. First at a small firm called RedMonk that specialized in development and open source and cloud and all sorts of fun things like that. And then I worked at 451 Research, where I research practice that was in charge of the software development and systems management. So in between those two analyst gigs, because I live in Austin, I worked at Delphile, and also I had a very interesting job that was hard to turn down to go work on corporate strategy and M&A there, helping build out the software group in cloud. It was really, in addition, 10 years of software development that I had at various places back when I did real work before all those jobs. This has really given me, it's let me kind of follow the passion that I have for thinking about how people can better produce software and really observing and studying how software development and the business, if you will, the process of software is playing out there. That's really what I like to spend a lot of my time talking about. And to that, I have a couple of podcasts you can check out there. There's a URL for it, and I put a lot of the different, I produce a lot of content and write a bunch of different things. You can follow that on my blog, or again, like I was saying, feel free to email me if you want to discuss any of these topics. It's always nice to meet new people. But that's me, just briefly. So let's jump into some of the reasons why you would do these things. I always like to begin any talk that suggests some sort of mild to difficult work as a consequence of believing the suggestions with some motivators for why you might care about it. I think it's good, especially when you're looking at doing company-wide transformation, to really have a good justification for why you should care. It's, and you like to entertain yourself by doing difficult work, which many in the IT department seem to like to do. It's good to have business justification. And the other reason is that whether you're working at a profit or a nonprofit motivated company, you're probably going to need to start talking with the non-IT related people, more of the mission, business, or goal-oriented folks. And you'll need to start learning, as we've talked about in previous episodes here, how to kind of like think of their language and what they're being motivated about. And really, as the IT department, your job is likely to support the goals that these so-called business people have. So let's delve into their world a little bit and see what's going on with them that would motivate you to think about being cloud native in the first place. So I like this quote to start off because there's very few things that are more business or businessy than looking at what large global banks say, let alone in their annual shareholder letter. So this is a quote that I pulled out. It's not too out of context. The ellipses there always belie some sort of mystery, but you can go look it up. Just click on that link down there, and you can find the full shareholder letter there. But it covers two things that I think are very representative of what I see happening out in the world outside of the IT department nowadays. And that is first that, as our CEO at Pivotal, Rob Mee, characterizes it, there's this mindset, kind of the Silicon Valley mindset, which is a very explorative, innovative, almost playing around with business models with the goal of being disruptive and improving how things are going. This is sort of the lowercase disruption, not the classic Clayton Christensen disruption, though sometimes the casing gets a bit confusing. But you have this mindset that companies who previously were heavy on the analog side or really not using, they were more using IT as a simulacrum of sort of more analog processes, right? Like email for memos and scheduling calendars and things like that. They weren't really using IT natively as a way of running their business. And you see companies, that are highly representative of this, like your classic companies like Netflix, Uber, Airbnb, but also companies like some more traditional companies, especially Pivotal customers are getting on this trend, where they're thinking about how can I start to use custom-written software to not only sort of put into life how my business runs, but to be a core way that I decide what my business is and how and defining how the business operates and differentiates. So you see in the first part that there's this acknowledgement from non-technology businesses that this software-driven mindset is coming. And to me, I mean, like I was talking about earlier, I've been studying and following the IT world for a while, and that mindset hasn't really existed so much. People have always known they needed to use computers, but they haven't always been thought of, especially custom-written software, as a core part of how they do business. And the second part is encouraging as well, especially working at a vendor, as I do, who's trying to help out people who have this attitude. And that is that these non-technology companies are saying they're up for the challenge of facing down this kind of mindset that's coming and trying to basically sort of compete with them and take business from them. And we see this across our customer base, we see this with non-customers that I talk with as well, that they're very eager to start learning how to use software to really make their businesses into programmable businesses or software-defined businesses, as I think about. So you see this pull from the business side to really start about how to think about using IT even more and more strategically. And so the logical next question that you want to ask is, all right, so is IT well situated to deliver on this? Are things going to pan out well? And that's where I like to use my little friend, the sad cloud guy here, to talk about if IT is well situated to deliver on what businesses want. And this is an excerpt from the annual benchmark that the consortium does. There's a good coverage in there if you want to go look it up and see how your peers are doing and how they're operating out there. But it's in response to this, what is your IT organization's role in business innovation? Or as I like to think about it, is IT helpful, right? Like, it's great that you can, as I was joking about earlier, schedule our meetings and sort of plan out who's going to bring, the kid to the birthday this week. You can figure out, like, if it's crazy Hawaiian shirt day, and also your email has to work and things like that. But is IT really doing something more than just keeping the light and the cakes in the kitchen and things like that? Like, is it being used as a core tool and a way of crafting what business is doing? So we look at the core answer there, right? That it's a key enabler for business innovation, coming up with new products. And while it stopped back in 2003 at about 0.5%, if you got it, that looks really good relative to how much it drops down. But half of IT is not really that great, that useful for business keeping on, which is a tremendous amount of corporate resources spent on something that's not really moving needle, as the kids say. Or I guess it's adults who say that. I don't think kids would ever say that. But then you see that not only does it start off with this sort of lame needle on a gauge of innovation, but it starts to drop off as the years go by. And all the way into in 2015, you can see that just about 1/3 of organizations think that is helpful to the business. Now, I'm sure no one listening to this, you're probably all in that happy pale blue color there. You're very innovative and helpful to the business. But then when you're having lunch with your peers who work at your company, maybe you can understand why they're so sour and they're hanging into their queso and order during lunch and things like that, because they don't have this sort of like importance and innovation for the business side. But, joking only half aside, what you sort of draw from this year, this is the context, remember, that we're going over, is more so than I remember seeing last 2 decades or so. There's this desire for business to start using it strategically. And if we get a sense, and I think this chart is pretty right about what the kind of Eeyore nature of IT I see out there, right? Like, they don't really seem like they're the task. You can see that there's kind of like apocalypse of mismatched expectations coming, right? IT organizations need to start looking at how they transform themselves to really meet this demand, to become more like a Silicon Valley mindset company, one of these cloud-native organizations. Well, so in order to start doing that, if you think about your goal is that you're going to change how an entire department operates in order to help an entire company out, to me, you need to start at the top, right? Viral spread of things is great if, it's a very time-tested, low-impact way to test out new technological ideas. You start with small teams and you kind of let it bubble up to a corporate product. And a lot of that is kind of what I covered in the greenfield scenario. But if you're looking to change things very broadly and at a core level, you really need to start with strategy, then go down to motivation. You do a top-down sort of change. So the first thing I want to look at is how you start differently about your strategy. And here by strategy, what I mean is how you as an organization figure out what your goals are, figure out how you're going to solve them, how you're not going to solve them. And mostly if you're a plethora company, you figure out how the business side of things, how you're going to find customers, do pricing, and basically get to that point where you've developed a product that you can exchange for cash, essentially. And all of that kind of this strategy. And there's very different ways of operating depending on what kind of disposition finds itself in, as we'll get to. So whenever you're in a situation where businesses are starting to think about how they'd like to execute, right? Like businesses want to become more cloud native, to be these software-defined businesses. It's good to think about how that contrasts with the traditional way of operating. Now, strategy-wise, there's all the dichotomies, that is sort of pairings of opposites up, that companies tend to go between depending on the mode they're operating in. And traditionally, if you were to go study up on strategy and see how most companies execute, they have this very traditional, very effective way of doing strategy, based on what I call the Porterian approach of doing things, which is based on finding, establishing, and defending your competitive advantage. Your competitive advantage being that thing that your company has that makes your customers choose you over someone else, your competitors. And oftentimes, you don't necessarily feel the need to innovate and come up with new things. Once you discover it, you just establish it and protect it and extract as much profit from it as possible. And again, if you think about most products that have existed throughout the history of humanity, this effect works pretty well. It's not often that people want brandings and you're always having to try to come up with new advantages and features that you have. In contrast, because of a lot of the advantages and functionality that cloud and software and mobile, all sorts of technology space are doing, there's actually a huge window open where you can discover brand new types of competitive advantage. In fact, those types of competitive advantages are becoming more transient. If you go read, you can look in the footnote there for this great book by Rita McGrath, kind of based on her continual commentary about businesses innovating. The idea is that things move so fast nowadays because they're fungible, largely because of sort of globalism and computers, essentially, to really boil down terms. But there's more transient advantage. So you have a smaller window where you can take advantage of competitors that you have. So you have to be out there continually farming and discovering these new things. You have to fundamentally change your strategy to assume that you're reinventing strategy very frequently, which is in contrast to the way most organizations work. Now, there's all sorts of things out there, bring it down to IT, that people talk about this mindset. And just so that you can orient yourself with, over in Gartner, they talk about bimotive, right? You have your legacy or your slow-moving IT that changes often, and you have your faster-moving new IT, which does differently. They'll call it mode 1 and mode 2, and they have different missions and approaches for doing that. Some people, think that it's terrible that you would bifurcate and have these two different modes of operating. They probably don't work in mega companies, and thanks to the difficulty of merging things together. Now, it's wonderful if you could have two modes of operating, but I think it's important to keep in mind that sometimes you need to have two, and sometimes you can just have one mode. When it gets down to software development, there's also this bifurcation between real software development and a very straw person approach of waterfall. And again, the idea of never quite being sure exactly what features you'll have in the final product or the date of release of the product and all the consequences and agile development of doing that, that's one mode of operating. Versus waterfall, we want to specify as much as possible up front. We deliver on that stuff without really changing the scope. There are types of projects where that fits. And also, I think a really great framing, because it's very clever and smart, but also because a lot of the reading is available beyond paywalls for you to read. It comes from Northly and this Pioneer's Town Planners thing. That's where the gradient chart over there is. That's really a great way of reading through and understanding you sort through strategy. But I like to type things to a great amount, and I think of things in an explore-exploit way. And you can kind of guess why I like this, what I've said thus far. And that is, at any given time, depending on the business environment, a company or an organization is either exploring new ideas and trying to find ones that they can master and then establish, or they already have ideas, products, if you will, and businesses that they've come out, and trying to exploit or get as much profit from it as possible. And these two ways of operating, whether you're exploring or exploiting, they have two very different ways that your company operates day to day, week to week. One of them is all about expending more money in higher growth and discovering something. And the other one is about expanding your market, that is growing your top-line revenue, and optimizing how you deliver on your service or product, that is optimizing your bottom-line revenue, your profits. And it's really worth thinking about what mode am I in. And you can guess that what I see a lot, and a lot of the customers of all types of industries I'll talk with. I'll give a quick overview of the types of customers and therefore industries that we are working with here at Pivotal. But they're more and more finding themselves in this mode where they need to explore, as we saw from the Jamie Dimon quote, right? Companies more and more want to discover new types of businesses, not just squeeze out the profits that they have from their existing businesses. So that really sets this mode for how you need to start thinking strategically. And I would argue most people don't think in an explore mode. So let's go over briefly how your company and management can start to think in more of an explore mode rather than exploit, which is a key switchover that management starts to need to make if they want to become more of a cloud-native company. So to really boil it down, it all sort of amounts to this if you're going to be in an explore mentality. And it is, you need to start becoming a learning organization. And what that means, to put it in kind of a crass way that you'll hear the Silicon Valley mindset talking about, is you sort of embrace failure and you think about failing fast. And what that really means, as this Thomas Edison quote alludes to, is that you realize that if you're exploring, you're always trying to discover and learn new things. And really the way you go about learning is by failing, right? You try something and it doesn't quite work out, so you study it and try to figure out what went right and what went wrong. Then you try it again and again and again until you've kind of perfected and explored things. I mean, true to our name, it's fun to work at a company named Pivotal because a lot of what we're talking about here is embraced in that name itself, right? As you're exploring new markets, you'll find yourself pivoting around to discover the right way of doing things, which again is a lot of what our customers find themselves in the position of needing to explore more. And as the management layer, once you've figured out how to reorient your strategy around exploration, or one of the more fancier ways of doing things, the next huge task you're going to think about is that management's new job is more about leading cultural change and change management. That becomes a huge part of what management needs to do. You're not really the kind of management that exists in exploit organizations, rightly so, that's more interested in making sure the wheels don't fall off and that you're checking on statuses and you're making sure that you're optimizing things and you're executing to plan. And instead, as we'll get into briefly here, management has to start thinking about how can we set up incentives and structures in order to change the culture to be more of an exploring culture that's figuring out new ways of doing things and is taking on more of that software-defined business mindset to become more of a cloud-native organization. So tactically, let's look at what that means a little bit, and I'll give you two references, you being management folks, to dive deep into this. So I, like a lot of people in computers, I used to play a lot of role-playing games instead of, I don't know, playing real reindeer games or anything like that. And one of the more popular ones is Dungeons and Dragons. And what happens in this game, I think, is a good analogy for what happens in an explorer-minded company. So you have players, you know, your sort of veritable dwarfs and warriors and wizards and thieves and all that nonsense. And they're the ones who are going through the adventure and saying what they're doing. And then you have another person who's called the Dungeon Master, as you might guess, given the name of the game. And their responsibility is really to come up with the game, that, you know, sort of the strategy, if you will, a loose outline of what should happen. And they also sort of enforce the rules, and they kind of act as the governor and the barriers and the feedback loop for the players. And it's this interaction between kind of the free-flowing players are happening and the Dungeon Master, who's kind of, if you will, kind of the computer at the center there, who really defines what that game looks like and helps make it fun. And you need both of these two roles in a game for it to be enjoyable. If you think about it, if you just had someone who is just sitting there writing out adventures and coming up with different rules, that wouldn't be too delightful. If you just had some players and they have no one to sort of like run the game, they're not going to have an enjoyable time either. And I think a lot of what management needs to do in this explorer mode is kind of like that. Your job is not so much to do everything or necessarily to punish or rule people with an iron fist. And instead you want to create a context with some loose guidelines and governance that moves people towards the right goals and direction. And to that end, a large part of what you have to do, as I was alluding to earlier, is set up a culture that really enhances and imbibes this idea of exploring and innovating. And as anyone who's been in management for a day or so knows, the culture and behavior we have is really going to follow the structure that you have. So the first thing you need to do is think about how you're structuring your organization. You probably shouldn't have siloed out teams, as we've talked about in previous versions, and instead you want to have integrated teams that work better. You want to have reporting structures that make sense, and you want everyone to be incented structure-wise to really explore, innovate, and make really great software as a way to move the business forward. And also, in addition to this, if you think about the Dungeon Master analogy, your job as management begins to be a lot about communicating your strategy, your principle, how things are doing. I would even say over-communicating. And this is the same as sort of like knowing what your strategy is and really telling people about it over and over again. Because as you change from an exploit culture, people are not necessarily going to trust this, and they really are going to want to know what it is you want them to do and why. And also, to reinforce that, you need to make sure that your incentives and your budgets are set up correctly so that you can award and reward people who are doing well and following the new way of doing things. I mean, again, think of all of the kind of behavioral economic stuff you've read in the sort of turns out pop psychology sort of man theory. And a lot of those practices become very vital and important to start using when you want to do change management. So, specifically, when it comes to agile software development and DevOps and thinking in a cloud-native way, those two books up there are actually really great references. The Concise Guide to Agile is a little old from 2010, but it has really good overviews of selecting projects, metrics to use, and things like that managers can really wrap their minds around when it comes to being more agile overall. And that Leading the Transformation book has similar elements for how managers can look at doing department-wide transformation and things in a more cloud-friendly way. So next, look at how, from a tops-down approach, strategy changes, how management can start to think about doing things differently to change to more of an exploratory organization that a cloud-native goal warrants. Let's look at how you can start thinking how people change, how you start to change the behaviors and what your people are doing. And after this, we'll look at a selection of how your tools change to support all of it, right? Like, we'll look at the actual T in the IT, the technology that supports moving at this speed and doing all this exciting execution stuff. So one of the best practices when it comes to looking at how to get the best possible software out of a group of people, out of an organization, is to make your teams have as end-to-end responsibility as possible. So to understand what this is, chart out in your mind what the end-to-end life of a piece of software would look like. Thinking about it to software developers designing and writing the code, to putting it in staging, to QA people testing it, to deploying it to production, to operating it to production, and then upgrading it again, and then closing that loop. You know, if you've seen previous episodes of this webinar, the continuous delivery cycle that kind of does all of those things. And unfortunately, when you have separate teams of people who are kind of locally optimized what they're doing in that chain, any given team, if you might look at them, might be really good at one part that they do, but you tend to lose the efficiency of the whole system if one team isn't responsible for that whole loop. And this is a lot of what the thinking behind DevOps is. If you want overall quality throughout the lifespan of a piece of software, you need to have the same integrated team of people working. So start thinking about how you can make your teams more integrated. This is probably a very literal thing. Having a team that has developer, operators, designers, product people. This is something that in Pivotal Labs, our agile software design consultancy, the company, we're very strict about. We find a lot of success. Everyone on one team always working together, and they can really achieve this cloud-native speed and quality that we're interested in here. Now, culturally, this also means that you want to open up more communications and truth-telling. You don't want people to hide ideas, good or bad, from you. And again, you see this a lot in exploit companies. It's all about executing the plan and making sure that you're wringing as much efficiency out as possible out of things. And people tend to get punished at mode of operating if they sort of in the status quo. But when you're trying to be innovative and exploring, that mindset hampers you and you close ideas for things that you're doing. So you, as management and also as staff, need to figure out ways of having more open communications with people And going back to the management part, you've got to incent and reward people for that as well in order to encourage them to do it. In order to move to this new way of doing things, we'll look at some of the core skill sets next. But you probably will do, of all crazy things that companies seem not like to do, training. You might actually stop and make sure that, excuse me, your people are skilled and trained in a new way of doing things. Now, you might be able to do this on your own with some enlightened people that you have, or just through reading books or things like that, but chances are you'll do good to have some external help come in and tell you about the new way of doing things. And really, you know, it's kind of summed up looking at your staff concerns in that old saying that I've heard throughout. People are our most valuable assets, right? I mean, companies rarely actually like that. But if we're in this explorer mode, this strategic mode of exploring, coming up with new things, and competing in a marketplace where other people are constantly trying to seat your position by doing that, you really do need to look at your people as your most valuable asset there. And just as an anecdote and a reminder, I think back to the Greenfield application, that point, when it comes to people capital, if you will, a lot of companies sort of bemoan the fact that, like, oh, it's great that all those unicorn companies out there can hire all these people, but we're normal companies. We're a bunch of Eeyores. And there's a great clip when Coté, who was at Netflix at the time, I think, heard that. And he said to this Fortune CEO who was saying that they couldn't get good enough people to do all this, he said, we hired them from you. So the point there being that you have the people who can become these great achievers and really help you out and be your most valuable asset. You just need to create that environment, that dungeon, if you will, that dungeon master game, where they can thrive and probably train and help them out. Because otherwise, probably will be recruited by those other companies and become the mythical horses somewhere else that you could have had in your own stable. So what are some of the skills that start relying on and make sure that your staff is up to speed on? Well, there's a whole assortment of them, but this is a nice collection that people have been talking about recently. There's some good big tributes on. By the way, that's a picture of one of our Pivotal Labs offices, and you can see they're doing one of our secrets, which is pairing. They not only pair programming, but they pair up on most all other aspects of it, which at first seems very counterintuitive, but it actually has great benefits to it if you think about knowledge spread and collaboration and innovation. But going back to this list, a lot of it's sort of a melange of agile software development skills, of cloud operation skills, and just good designs in general. And I would encourage you to go through all of these items and think about, benchmark yourself against your peers and think about how well do we do with these and could we improve? Do we even press these things? Do I even know what they are? But when I look at companies that are not those unicorn companies that we're talking about previously, but they're just very normal mainstream companies, I find that they're really taking these skills seriously and mastering them. And so you really think about, if my people are my core asset and the people aggregate into an organization and we put a continuous delivery process in place, as we'll get into with DevOps and microservices, a good cloud platform, are we operating as efficiently as possible, or are we just kind of going through the motions? And this is kind of a good list of the meat skills that you'll want to perfect or improve. And you know, on any of these given topics, there's it'd be great to talk with you if interested or struggling with these things to any degree, or if you've had success with them. And these are really the kind of things that we help out companies succeed at if they want to become one of these cloud native organizations. So that's just a good start to look at the types of things that you should expect your people to start doing. So before we get into the last part, kind of the tools that we at Pivotal have that help enable all of this wonderfulness, a lot of what people ask at this point is what the shape of the organization ends up looking like. So how do I move the staff around and shape the business? How do I structure it so it has the kind of behaviors I would like? So a lot we're interested in here, as we've been going over, is starting to use custom-written software as the core enabler, the core thing that shapes what your business does. So your custom-written software, your applications are your most valuable asset after your people, I suppose, but your most valuable type of IT asset. So you would expect that as your most of your resources are allocated there. And indeed, that's what we end up seeing. And so this is kind of a sort of a funnel of the amount of people we see at these various layers in an organization. They tend to layer out like this. So at the business capability layer, you tend to see those integrated teams of software developers, product owners, the operations staff that help companies understand, that help developers and teams understand how to operate this stuff, and then actually operate in production and are dedicated to a product, if you will. Remember, an integrated team dedicated to the full life cycle of product. We see the most people up there because that's where the most innovative things are. Now, you need to run all of your applications on top of something. We would call that a platform. And what I'm seeing out there, whether people use something like Pivotal Cloud Foundry or another platform, we end up with what I call an accidental platform. They end up building their own platform. Most people who are cloud natives end up having a platform, because if you just one-off build an IT stack for every single application, you just get so bogged down in managing all of those stacks that you really can't move effectively. And after several years, you really can't move at a speed that you need to be an explorative company. So people end up with a platform, and that platform needs to evolve and be taken care of. It's a product in its own if you think about it. But because it's so highly automated, you don't really need that many people on it, and it evolves a bit slower than the applications on top of it, but you do find that you need staff to maintain and bear that platform. Like that, so all of this software actually has to run on something. So you have the site reliability engineers, they're often called nowadays, the SREs, or the operators who are operating that platform. They make sure it keeps up and running, that it has all of the sort of security needs that it wants, and so forth and so on. And they're often also involved in upgrading the platform and making sure that it's operating as well. And underneath that, even more in real life, you have all of the compute, the storage, and the networking. The data centers, whether you're actually insourcing, running that all on your own, you're running it in a colo, or you're doing it in a public cloud somewhere, there are people who are dedicated to making sure that your infrastructure stays alive and up and running. And that's an even smaller amount of people who are working on that area. And to give you a sense of how this fans down, we have one customer in the financial industry who is running 104 applications at the business capability level, and they have only one full-time operations person running that for them. And we see similar numbers in our public instance, Pivotal Web Services, where we have thousands and thousands of applications running there. Just a handful of operators who are responsible for running it. And it really is, there's a tremendous amount of learnings and cloud automation. Those stacks below really allows you to focus as much as possible at the top layer, make this kind of funnel of staffing in your stack, in your organization. So let's close out by looking at what exactly a lot of that cloud automation, that platform is. Now, you know, if you'll pardon me, being at Pivotal, I'm going to go over the product that we have and illustrate how it fits into a cloud platform. But if anything, what I'd like you to take away is an idea of our platforms, and you want to start thinking about seeing them out and make sure you have a cloud platform that satisfies the needs that you have. You know, I obviously think is to use our cloud platform, but whether you build your own or look at another one, at least make sure that you don't end up with an accidental platform that really slows down your quest to becoming a cloud-native organization. So first, let's look at a general principle of how you think about your tool selection. You know, it's sort of a common theme in this series to think about. Before we even start thinking about computers and the software, let's look at the principles that we humans, that we meet sex, and figure out how we can make them comply with us, how we can make our technology fit to what we need. So to that end, one of the patterns that I've seen companies being successful with when they want to become cloud-native organizations is this idea of standardizing below the value. And this is a common trope in technology, especially enterprise IT thinking for a while. But it's especially true in IT nowadays. One, because I've been around so long, and two, because we have great cloud technology that can make it a lot real. So I have a couple slides excerpted from this year's presentation by a Pivotal customer, CoreLogic, Cloud Foundry Summit. And it goes over what I see very commonly at IT organizations. When I go talk with larger organizations, most of them think they have that Anna Karenina problem of family dysfunctionality. Every IT department is screwed up, each in its own individual way. But what I find is it's actually, I wouldn't say the opposite, but it's not exactly accurate. They're all pretty much screwed up in the same way. I guess they don't really talk with each other enough to realize that it's all sort of the same. And this CoreLogic presentation, it's a great little presentations from 2014 and 2015, so you can see they've been making. They'd acquired many companies over the past 10 years or so they ended up with this portfolio that you see on top that has a tremendous amount of variation. It's seemingly like across these thousands of applications they have, there's different operating systems, middleware, and stuff beneath there. So if you think about inheriting and amalgamating all that stuff, that becomes a management mirror, and it kind of like gives you so much technical debt that it's hard to move at cloud native speed. So what they want to do is, and what they're in the middle of doing, is standardizing things for the business value in my own terminology. They want the applications and having variability there, but they want to take all the learnings from the past 10 years of cloud and really get all of the best stuff underneath there and make sure that they have building a platform that enables the application stuff above it. And indeed, this is just one public case. That's why I have it here, so you can go look it up and see the presentations. But I see this across many organizations, that they've got this huge array of things. And they're looking to standardize as much as possible of what's underneath the business value, underneath the application layer. Now, there's a lot of dependence, like as in it depends, about how you do that. You might choose to standardize on languages or middleware, or maybe you get advantage by allowing a polyglot approach. It just depends on what your situation is. You might all standardize on the same ALM pipeline and process, or not. Who knows? But think about standard. I would start by standardizing as much as possible and claw back from that, rather than proving that you should standardize something. And finally, you know, there's just a side effect of this. I just wrote up my column for Fierce DevOps recently about this. How if you standardize on a platform, it also gets you lots of governance, risk, and compliance benefits. You think of if you've got all these unique one-off stacks that you're doing, every time you go through an audit and compliance process, you have to basically re-verify everything. Whereas if you're just using a more standardized thing, not only are you speeding up your ability to deploy it on top of it and understand it because you've got a standard approach underneath a platform, but if you know over the trust of your audit, trust that platform, and they don't have to recertify on it. So take this approach when you're looking at a platform and figure out how you can standardize as much as possible, because there's a lot of great things from the last 10 years of cloud that we'll introduce, many of which we're making into things like Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So next, we get into the stack. These are the three things that we're finding you want to achieve with your technology. You want whatever stack and technology you choose to really help you out with these three things. Because these sort of, I'm, for lack of a better phrase, calling it sort of like the golden triangle. Three things well together that almost are impossible to do without each, or it would be too much effort if you didn't get the other two to help out with it. If you want to be a cloud-native company that's kind of operating at this speed, we are deploying for weekly, if daily, and always improving that software, and therefore getting to this point where you can have a programmable business. Really what you want to achieve, the goal is to have a continuous delivery process in place, which we've talked about earlier. So you have a whole process end-to-end in place that allows you to write code and test it and deploy it. You're removing so much variability and automating so much that you can deploy on a daily basis. And this proven to improve not only the bug quality, but the design quality of the product you have. But moving that at that speed requires a different way of operating. It requires developers to write their code differently, not only in smaller batches, but to have it be immediately operationalized. And it also requires operators to be able to accept and use code at that high of a rate in production. And that's where DevOps comes in as like the best bucket of supporting thinking and process and skills. Yeah. So if you're doing continuous delivery, it's highly likely you're going to need to start DevOps as well. So you can start to see how these things are interrelated and interdependent. And then when it gets to how you write your software, following as we talked about in previous installments, 12-factor app principles and other kind of native ways of doing things, the architectural style you look for is a microservices approach. It's really a very nice evolution of service architecture, or SOA think, that starts to think a lot more not only about how do we break components of your application down into small, loosely coupled pieces, but how do we break our organization down into small, loosely pieces that are very decoupled and operate even on different schedules. And we have this decoupling as a consequence of any small batch thinking. You end up with a move fast, and you get more resiliency in the overall system. So these 3 areas, 3 disciplines, that increasingly we're finding pivotal. You need to master these 3 disciplines and have an overall approach and technology that supports them. So keep these in mind, in addition to the goal of standardizing below the business value as what you want to achieve with the tools that you've put in place. So finally, here's a very high-level overview of the tech that we are. You can see on the left side how the culture, how the organization fits in there, right? Like you have the developers, the DevOps team, the operations team. That kind of loosely maps to the structure of the IT organization I was talking about previously. And we, similar to how we cut out the organization into 4 layers, we think about 4 layers of the stack that you have. Above this, of course, sits your actual applications, the actual software that you're writing. This is the platform that we at Pivotal are fitting into here and are evolving. We've been working on it for about 6 years now, and we really have it at this stage get to in the next, where lots of organizations are depending on it to help enable their cloud-native strategies, to really shift over to that Explorer way of doing things. So let's start at the bottom. So first of all, you're going to have some infrastructure. And nowadays, that basically means running a cloud infrastructure as a service. And when you're looking at that, as I'm sure you found looking at your own and talking with your peers, and as we definitely find, people want the ability to run on all of infrastructure. They don't want to have to choose just one type across AWS, VMware, or Azure, or OpenStack, or Google, or whatever. They not only have the flexibility in a kind of analog way to move to different infrastructure as needed, but they might actually have real requirements where they might want to run on public cloud for some workloads, and they might want to run on their own cloud workloads. This can come about for security reasons, for geographic reasons, just process things like developers want to run on a different cloud than in production. And so that's the first thing that we start off with, is we have a layer called BOSH that layers on top of any, well, not any, but all of the great types of clouds out there. And actually a pretty good, like 18, 20 method thing we call the cloud provider interface, that if you reach or your CPI to conform to that spec, we can layer on whatever infrastructure you want and get you that multi-cloud ability that you like. And this also allows you to establish, as we move up the stack, a common application development and layer on top of any type of cloud that we support, of course, now or in the future. So what this means is that if you want to move between different types of clouds, your runtime and your operations and your development model does according to how that cloud operates. So it's an abstraction that isolates you from that and gives you flexibility. And to that end, runtime platform layer in the middle there, we can think of it as the Cloud Foundry layer. Pivotal Cloud Foundry is actually all of this, sort of wrapped up, if you will. But that is where a lot of orchestration, workload placement, this is where the container management goes on. I think it's kind of interesting that when you look at all the container conversation out there, it's mostly centered on this, thinking about how you orchestrate containers and do scheduling and place them. But really, it's just one part of the overall platform that you'll need, just managing where your applications are placed and their uptime and their availability, all of that kind of stuff. So on top of that, you'll need actual, you used to call it middleware, or your application, because all of the programming languages from Java to Ruby, Python, Node, Go, and these other languages support. Integrated middleware that's very cloud-enabled and knows how to run in a scale-out way and can be provisioned through self-portals by developers, and it can be plenty. It's just fully integrated into that stack. And we have a tremendous amount of middleware and services and backing services that layer on there, and we think of that as the application layer. And what's nice about this layered approach, and I was alluding to this with that CPI talk, is between each of these layers, there's a series of contracts and promises. So as an example, the promise is if you write your middleware to conform to what the runtime platform needs, it can manage it on its own, and then you need less people to manage and provision that for you. If satisfy those 18 or 20 methods in our CPI, we can run it on whatever infrastructure is out there and make sure it has good uptime and availability and security and so forth and so on. So start thinking about how your platform's out these responsibilities and really adds in those layers of abstraction. So you not only have the capability and functionality you need now, but it's a malleable and flexible enough platform so that over the years you can add in and you don't get stuck in the platform that you're in. And to that end, here is just a few of the logos of customers who are using Pivotal Cloud Foundry to help them deliver on all of these dreams of being a cloud-native organ, to start getting their business closer and closer to that idea of being a software-defined business. So there's many more, of course, who would rather us not use their logos, but you can see that these are these are companies that are not high-tech companies. They're not companies who are necessarily selling software primarily like we are. Some of them are tech companies or service providers like CenturyLink in there, but other ones are just regular companies, and I mean that as a compliment, right? Like I think a technology company doing awesome things with technology is sort of diet advice from a celebrity or an athlete. Like it's part of their job to be really good at technology, so of course they're great at it. Whereas if you look at regular companies learning how to be great athletes or great technologists, I think it's nice to see that there are people out there who are probably situated similar to you. They are becoming as good as technology companies at it. Now you can look up all sorts of interesting references. There's actually at our CF Summit, too, in the Core Logic case earlier, there's all sorts of presentations you can see from customers like GE and Allstate and Humana and Keed and others up here, Verizon as well, kind of going over how they've been doing this. But there are real success stories out there, right? Like all of this stuff we've been going over in this transformation journey, other ones is not really theoretic. There are companies who are succeeding at it every day. And I would, if you have any sort of like fear, uncertainty, or doubt around it, don't worry. There's plenty of other people who are metaphorically jumping over the bridge. And you know, if you see your friends jumping over the bridge, you know it's safe to do, as my parents used to say before. You know, you jump over a bridge if your friends did, but the water is warm and comfortable down there. Go check it out. You'll be the maverick figuring out if rocks or a soft, pillowy water underneath you. So just to close out, I believe, if you've seen the series, plenty of references to other things and other sorts of things to dig in deeper. So if you're interested in these topics and you want to get into it more, if you haven't seen the Greenfield journey yet, like I would recommend going, because it does go over at the team level, kind of high level over how the team starts to operate and think about how it does its software differently. The Lucy one is good as well. I mean, they're all fantastic. And also, if you prefer PDFs and booklets and series and webinars, we're coming out with a booklet of the Cloud Native Journey, so you can look forward to that. That hopefully will be handy to send along and maybe put yourself to sleep at bedtime or read it on long flights if you want to look through something. Also, if you enjoy the more common approach to looking at these two things, I have two of mine that I'd recommend to you. The first one is Pivotal Conversations, and in that one, it's mostly with Pivotal people that I talk, but we occasionally talk with partners of ours and customers and other people. But we really pick a single topic, like how to deal with data, or how to start establishing trustization, or what this idea of those 4 layers of a cloud-native organization is, and we really dive deep into it and have a very conversational approach to that. I have another podcast. It's my own podcast. It's kind of a corny name, the Lords of Computing. And a host of mine, a person who works at Allstate, Matt Curry, and I interview people, talk about their journeys going through transformations. And so it's a good way to listen to how your peers and other people have wangled through a lot of the things we've been talking about in this webinar series. If you want to get a really good quick start to thinking about, getting to feel about and thinking about how to use a platform, we have something called Pivotal Web Services. It's the public instance of Pivotal Cloud Foundry that we have running, and you can get 2 months free on it, and you can really get a sense of what the developer experience feels like, and not all of what it's like to be a operator of it, because we run the cloud for you, so you don't have to install and operate it, but you can start to get a sense of what a lot of the operations things are as far as managing it up and setting up. And it's really, because it's free, it's quite easy to use, and you can find it quite easily, and just get 2 free months with it. Also, if you're really serious about this, or maybe even mildly serious, and you want to sort of experience by proxy what it's like, you should email me or find someone else, and you can come visit our Pivotal Labs locations. We have one in San Francisco, New York, Boulder, let's see, Chicago, London, and off in Asia we have a couple as well, and we're opening a whole more in 2016. But it's a great outcome to see how all of these things work. Like if you remember the sort of benchmarking your Agile skills, you can see a lot of those things in practice, and you really get a flavor of not only what it looks like, but that it's possible. And then finally, in addition to the great books referenced over there, which I'll leave as an exercise to the listener to look up, they're wonderful references about all stuff. We'll be doing a lot of jobs over 2016 where you can come in half-day or full-day sessions, go from the very top of the way down to actually deploying code and get a nice day-long or half-day-long simulation of what it would be like to operate like this and really be a cloud type of outfit. Well, with that, I would like to end with this quote because it really does sum up what I think my team, and the whole of Pivotal is trying to do here. And that really is evolve and make better how people are doing software. And I think that the way that you do that, exploring and then helping other people out with it. And I think you know, the more that we can improve software out there. Software is so fundamental to the way that most organizations in the world works nowadays, that the more we can improve it, the more we can improve our everyday lives. So it really is worth figuring out how you can make software better. You know, and if you're in the profit-seeking world, it really is a way to reach what your fortunes are. You know, a lot of the logos that we put up there, the customers that we have, they're looking towards software to really not only cement in and protect and grow the market position that they have, but come up with whole new markets and offerings they can do. And when I work with large government organizations and other nonprofit-driven outfits, they're looking to software to be able to better deliver on their mission and better deliver service to citizens. Everyone's looking at software as a way to improve things, and I generally think that that's possible. So with that, before I get to a couple of questions, to everyone who's listened to this whole series, and thank people who've listened to this as well. And if you're interested in any follow-up, or you've got things that you want to discuss, good or bad, or you know, you just have stories you want to swap, I would love it if you reached out to me, and I'd be happy to talk with you. And with that, let me look at some of the questions that we had. Like I said, we won't be able to answer all of them, and some of them we'll answer in text. But let me just look real quickly here. So first, one question is, how long should we plan our transformations to take? So, you know, that's a valid question, which I didn't really hit very much. So I think there's the usual answer of it depends, but there's a more clear answer. So there's two timelines I would look at for transformation. So the first one is that within, I would say, to be fair, you know, a matter of weeks. You could do it in a matter of days, especially if you set up a PWS account and really knew what you were doing. That's a Pivotal Web Services account. And you could deploy within minutes, essentially. It would just, the thing that would take the longest is you coding and figuring out what to do, essentially. But weeks is a more realistic low bar. I have seen companies that we've started to work with that in weeks they're deploying their first real application, right? Something that it may not be a full, like a gigantic, big functional application, but it's been proven that in at least a week you can deploy something that's useful and really helps move it around. So you can start getting really fast feedback quickly. And if you're not, you know, with the approach that you have, if you're not deploying code on the first day or within weeks, then there probably is something wrong with the approach that you're taking. You know, maybe you're not to the point yet where you can do that because you haven't like learned all the tools and gotten them in place. But once you've learned the tools and gotten them in place, you should really be able to deploy really quickly. All of your compliance and audit stuff aside, that might actually take longer, and that kind of gets to the point of the transformation stuff. There's a lot more company-wide things you need to start changing. But writing, testing, deploying, and running the code is something you can do quickly. Now, looking at the company-wide lens, changing things at a department level and a company-wide level, what I'm seeing out there is it takes on the order of basically probably a couple of years. Like after 1 year, you should have things set up and you should get to the point where you can start deploying applications and having applications in production. But after a couple of years, you should really be kind of in that kind of sweet spot of that's the new way of doing things, and that's kind of the steady state you're operating. And as an example, We have one customer who, this is on, I would say, the really fast end of the scale, and it's probably because the applications they were moving and the applications they were doing were written in a very cloud-friendly way. But just after 4 months, they have 100 applications in production, if I remember the anecdote correctly. And they've got about just over 250 applications that are not yet in production, but that are in dev test, so they're on the path to do that. So that's a pretty phenomenal result for just 4 months of having their stuff up and running. Now, on the other end of the, another end of the spectrum, if you go and watch the core logic cases, after a year of trying to explore and study what they wanted to do here and getting Pivotal Cloud Foundry in place and learning how things are going, I think they have somewhere on the order of 10 or less or so new applications that they've managed to deploy there. And then there's also a great keynote by Humana where at the time when they gave it back in March, if I remember when the CS Summit was, they had 3 different applications that they had up and running in a cloud-native style. So, like I said earlier, it depends a great deal about the types of applications you're moving, if they're brand new, if you're just forklifting them, and all sorts of things like that. But I would start thinking in the terms of what happens in the first week, what happens in the first month, and then after a year, you should be getting to the point where you're deploying and running real applications in production that have some value, and you're kind of on that continuous delivery treadmill. So there's another question to talk about. Let's see, to summarize it, how to deal with clients in more detail. If you want to email me or kind of follow me on Twitter, you can. When that column I wrote is published, I'll definitely have it there. But to summarize, I would look at dealing with auditors in the same way that developers started looking at dealing with operators. And way back when in Agile, how developers started looking at dealing with QA. And that is QA, operators, auditors, all of these groups of people, from a developer's perspective, were basically bottlenecks to getting their code in production and just getting running, right? But what developers did, either on purpose or accidentally, and with DevOps, operators were also kind of responsible for this, is they started to try and think more inclusively and empathetically about including each of those bottleneck roles in their team. And they more and more subsumed in kind of a reverse Russian doll sort of approach, like growing from a small thing to a larger thing. They started to do a land grab, subsume these different roles, and have them on the integrated team. And similarly, you should think about the people who are doing your audit, your GRC stuff. Like, talk with them directly. Don't let some intermediary like IT staff or security people necessarily who are to what you need to do for compliance do that. Talk directly to audit compliance people. First, use tactics like the 5 whys and things like that to understand what they need exactly and how it can fit. And once you explain to them a highly automated, very structured platform approach, a lot of the cloud-native stuff we're doing, you'll probably find that they can change around what were previously very strict ways of applying, actually be not only compliant as the previous strict modes are, but actually be even more helpfully and more generally compliant, right? A lot of compliance is just about certifying and pointing to that you followed the right process. There's not always a lot of checks and balances that you are actually executing on that, it's just saying you were. With all of the automation that's built into native approach, you can actually get a lot closer to doing GRC. And you can also start to actually automate a lot of things like generating the mythical 3D rings and all the documentation that you need. But there's actually, I think, a lot of hope in automating out your GRC stuff when it comes to a cloud approach. I think it's by no means as scary as it may seem at first. Well, with that, sorry we don't have enough time to get to all the questions. To answer as many as we can in an email or here. And once again, I really appreciate everyone who's along, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to everyone out there, or at least a subset of them. And thanks again, and have a good day.